15 spine-chilling tales from the darkest corners of Reddit, terrifying secrets revealed. Sarah sat in her cozy living room, scrolling through her phone when she stumbled across a post titled 15 spine-chilling tales from the darkest corners of Reddit. Intrigued, she clicked it open. What started as light reading turned into a rabbit hole of horror. Stories of seemingly perfect neighbors harboring dark secrets, eerie lights flickering in the woods, and missing pets flooded her screen. Her heart raced with each tale, the words dripped with dread, painting horrifying images in her mind. A sinister chill settled on her skin, a reminder that danger could lurk behind the most ordinary facades. Late that night, she lay in bed, convinced she heard whispers on the wind. Shadows danced in her mind, slinking through the backyard of her Maplewood home, where her children laughed and played just hours before. She returned to the thread, excitement fading into terror. The stories narrated accounts of pets vanishing without a trace, the Johnson's cat, the McCoy's dog, all before she heard rustling behind her house last week, where shadows seemed to come alive. Panic gripped her, her mother instincts screamed at her to protect Jake and Lily. Before she could catch her breath, her imagination ignited with visions of something sinister lurking behind her neighborhood's idyllic facade, waiting for the right moment to strike. When she brought her fears to Mark, he chuckled and rolled his eyes, brushing off her worries like dust on a shelf. "It's just Reddit fiction, Sarah. You know how people are online." But it wasn't that simple anymore. Each day, the faces of her neighbors morphed into something foreign. Where once there were smiles, now an unsettling gaze lingered. The joyful block parties felt orchestrated, stiflingly unnatural. An invisible weight hung in the air, tensions rippling beneath the surface. As the night wrapped around her home, Sarah scoured local folklore, desperate for something solid to grasp. Her fingers trembled as she turned the pages of aged newspapers in the library, unearthing stories going back generations that whispered of disappearances and shadows creeping through Maplewood's past. Then, she uncovered a horrifying connection, a map between the stories and a certain Mr. Greaves, the reclusive man who lived next door. Each headline felt like another nail in the coffin of her comfort. Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system, and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The moment she pieced it together, the lights in her home flickered ominously, as if responding to her realization. The storm brewing in her heart mirrored the one brewing outside. Soundless gusts rustled the branches deeply, branches that seemed to arch closer toward her windows as if listening. There it was again, a faint, familiar scratch at her door. Breath caught in her throat. Sarah hesitated. Was it Jake? Was it Lily? Or something sinister that had crept into their once safe haven? The shadows outside felt darker, more menacing. Her instincts screamed to open the door, but uncertainty clenched her heart. Alone in a silence filled with the weight of dread, she felt the abyss of the unknown staring back at her, challenging her will to protect her children. What would she choose to uncover? As her heart raced, she barely dared to breathe. The scratching at the door intensified. It felt desperate, frantic. Sarah pressed her ear against the wood, heart thudding loudly in her chest. She could hear her own breath, shallow and quick, as she strained to listen for any hint of movement outside. Was it Jake and Lily? The thought pulled her toward the door like a magnet, but each step felt heavier than the last. Maybe they came back from the neighbor's, she whispered to herself, half-heartedly convincing her racing mind. Yet the chilling dread pulsed through her. What if it wasn't he them? "Mom!" A voice suddenly called from the backyard, piercing through the veil of her fear. It was unmistakably Jake. Relief flooded her for a brief moment, only to be quickly overshadowed by a rush of unease. Why hadn't they walked in the front door? "Jake?" She called back, trying to keep her voice steady. No response. Just the scratching. She hesitated, shivering as the wind howled outside and rattled the glass, sinister whispers wrapping around her. Each heartbeat seemed to echo louder, taunting her. The front door creaked open a sliver enough to see a pair of small figures silhouetted in the porch light. Jake and Lily stood there, bodies rigid, eyes wide with fright and confusion. They looked like lost children. "Mom, we heard something." In Mr. Greaves's yard, Jake stammered, stepping forward, but Lily pulled him back. A wave of something in her expression broke Sarah's heart. It was fear, a child's fear wrapped in the understanding that an adult could not protect them from every shadow lurking at night. "What do you mean? Did you see something?" Sarah knelt quickly, pulling both of them close. They huddled together like young animals seeking shelter from a storm, and she felt an overwhelming urge to shield them from whatever was out there. I think there was something in the bushes." "It moved," Lily said, voice barely a whisper. Her eyes darted toward the shadowy garden, the wooden fence casting elongated shapes that twisted in the dim light. The wind sent chills down Sarah's spine. From the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of movement, a dark silhouette darting away from the edge of the woods. "Stay close," she whispered fiercely, pulling them tighter to her side. "Mom, what if it's the thing from the stories?" Jake asked, voice gravelly with fear. She stared, barely able to breathe, realizing that their innocent world was crumbling. The tales had seeped into their reality. Shadows danced just beyond the tree line, whispering dangers. Every fear she thought she had brushed off became tangible in that moment. Suddenly, an unearthly howl pierced the night, freezing the air. The kids clung tighter, and Sarah's heart sank. Gathering her composure, she felt a surge of bravery. "We're going inside. Now." Just then, another noise, a sharp crack, like a branch snapping. As they turned to retreat into the house, she glanced back one last time at the darkness beyond. Something stirred again, its presence undeniable. Once inside, Sarah locked the door, her hands trembling. The shadows through the windows felt alive. The walls were closing in, and the realization struck her like lightning. Mr. Greaves, he wasn't just a recluse. "Why don't we make some hot chocolate?" She tried to comfort them, though her own voice trembled. The children nodded, but their eyes were still filled with terror. She grabbed a mug while they tried to settle on the couch, the room feeling claustrophobic, and then, just as she stirred the chocolate, her phone buzzed on the counter. A new notification. She swiped, and her blood ran cold. The post was updated. The map, more secrets of Maplewood revealed. The terror tightened in her chest, she froze as the walls seemed to breathe her fear back at her. What more could she uncover? What had she awakened? The chill crept deeper, and she felt those eyes on her through the darkness again. What was Mr. Greaves really up to? But the bigger question loomed: what would she do to protect her children if the darkness came for them? The silence that followed felt like a thick fog, wrapping around Sarah and the kids as they sat in the dimly lit living room. The shadows from the street cast eerie patterns on the walls, twisting and curling like fingers reaching out to grasp them. The hot chocolate boiled over on the stove, but she didn't notice. Her mind was racing, filled with images of her neighbor's twisted secrets. "Mom, what's wrong?" Jake's voice pulled her from the depths of her thoughts. His face was pale, and Lily had her arms crossed tightly over her knees, staring at the floor. "Nothing," Sarah lied, forcing a smile that felt foreign on her lips. "Just a little distracted." Distracted? More like terrified. The post had made her pulse race with a mix of horror and curiosity. What secrets could Maplewood hold? The unshakable feeling that something was terribly wrong gnawed at her gut. She paced the room, her footsteps muffled by the carpet. The scratching at the door still echoed in her mind, a chilling reminder that whatever had lurked outside might not have gone far. Sarah fixed her gaze on the window, half expecting to see those dark figures lurking in the shadows, those eyes piercing through to her very soul. "Let's just stay put and enjoy our treats," she finally suggested, reaching for a mug. But as the hot chocolate sloshed over the rim, she caught another glimpse of fleeting darkness flickering past the corner of her eye. "Did you see that?" Lily whispered, her voice barely a breath. "See what?" Sarah snapped, the edge of her nerves spilling over. "Outside," Jake said, pointing toward the dark window. "Something moved." "Don't worry. It's just the wind," she said, more assured of that than she felt. Yet dread bubbled in her chest like a cauldron on the verge of boiling over. She moved to the window, feeling as if she were approaching a cliff, ready to peer down into the abyss. The night outside was ink-black, every corner devouring the light. She squinted into the darkness, and just as she was about to pull away, she caught the glint of something eyes. They were wide and unblinking, reflecting the faint glow from the street lamp. Just as quickly, they vanished, swallowed by the night. "What was it?" Jake asked, gripping Lily's arm tightly. Sarah's voice caught in her throat, a knot of fear constricting her breath. "I don't know," she whispered. She turned back to the children, forcing herself to appear calm. "We should go to the bedroom, out of view from the windows." "Why?" Jake said, hesitation lacing his voice. "Because I want us to be safe," she replied firmly. They moved quickly, the three of them climbing the stairs like a herd of deer, glancing back as if something might pounce at their heels. As they settled onto her bed, Sarah stuffed pillows behind them, barricading themselves in. The room was dim, the only light coming from the street lamp filtering through the curtains. Still, shadows danced along the walls. "Mom," Lily whispered again. "Do you think Mr. Greaves is still out there?" "Mr. Greaves?" Sarah hadn't thought of him much since the chaos began. "We won't talk about that now." She meant to be soothing, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Suddenly, her phone buzzed again, cutting through the silence like a knife. She grabbed it fearfully, not knowing what new horror awaited her. The notification blinking at her read, Maplewood's dark history, the horrifying tales of its missing residents. Fingers trembling, she opened the article. Her breath hitched as she scanned the first line's strange disappearances, whispers of the woods, and warnings passed down. The hairs on her neck stood on end. "What is it, Mom?" Jake asked, leaning in closer. "I don't know yet," she whispered, dread spilling into the room like poison. But deep down, she felt a pull, a glimpse into a truth that had been lying just beneath the surface. And just then, seconds felt like hours as another sound echoed through the night, a soft, scratching noise, but this time it came from inside the house. What was it? She clamped her eyes shut, the darkness closing in around them, and whispered a prayer. Would they find the strength to face whatever lurked there, or would it consume them all? The scratching noise grew louder, each scrape against the wood resonating like a death knell in the quiet room. Sarah's heart thundered in her chest, a primal warning of approaching danger. The children clung to her, their wide, scared eyes searching hers for reassurance. But she felt anything but calm. "Just stay quiet," she whispered, her voice shaking. Fear clawed at her throat, threatening to rupture the fragile calm they had built. She wished she could tell them everything was fine, that the absurdity of her fears could be dismissed, but deep down, she knew this was real. The scratching stopped abruptly, leaving a heavy silence that enveloped them like a suffocating blanket. It was worse than the sound, an anxious stillness that hung in the air, as if whatever had made its way inside was now considering its next move. Suddenly, the children's soft breaths filled the void, a frantic reminder of their vulnerability. Sarah felt their fear and it churned her guts. What had she dragged them into? "Mom." Jake's voice quivered, breaking the stillness. "What was that noise?" "I don't know," she forced out, her eyes darting to the closed bedroom door, then back to the kids. With every passing second, the oppressive silence weighed heavier. She strained to hear any hint of what lay beyond the door. Had it just been the wind? A tree branch scraping against the wall? Or something sinister hiding in wait? The door creaked ever so slightly. Sarah's breath caught once again. "Get under the blanket," she urged, her voice steadying as the protective instinct welled within her. They obeyed without question, hiding beneath the fabric, their fear palpable. Sarah grabbed her phone, its meager light flickering against the shadows like a fragile candle struggling against a storm. She thumbed through the article again, hoping desperately to find some clue, something that could connect to the lurking presence in her home. Her hands trembled as she read about the vanishings, and her heart sank deeper with each horrifying detail. The last disappearance had been nearly a decade ago. People had whispered about it, shared stories like a game of telephone, until it faded, replaced by everyday dramas. But those families hadn't really gone away, had they? Something more sinister lurked beneath the surface of that history, the woods, crawling with dark secrets, eager to reclaim the lost. Just when she thought the darkness couldn't get more intense, something else broke that silence. A thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy breathing, labored and raspy, drifting up from the hallway. Lily gasped, squeezing Sarah's hand tightly. Jake's body tensed beside her, and they exchanged panicked glances as the breathing grew louder. It was close. Too close. "Mom, what is that?" Jake asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I don't know," Sarah replied, her heart racing, a cold sweat slicking her palms. In that moment, everything shifted. The air felt charged, electric with dread, and in the play of shadow and light, she saw it. A figure, barely visible, crossing just outside their bedroom door. She couldn't breathe. It paused, and Sarah's instincts screamed at her to do something, anything. Yet she felt frozen, as if the creature had cast a spell over her. Then, without warning, it knocked 3 sharp raps against the door. "Let me in," a voice hummed, soft yet chilling, almost hypnotic. "Mom, who is it?" The children whispered in unison, fear coursing through their small frames. "Stay under the covers," she hissed, her heart now loud enough to drown out the voice. With shaking hands, she grabbed a lamp, ready to defend against whatever terror awaited beyond that barrier. The voice came again, more insistent. "Let me in, I just want to talk." Panic gripped Sarah's chest. What could it want? Why was it here? The words knotted in her brain like a tight fist. The next moment deadened everything around her. The scratching began anew, scraping across the wooden frame of the door, relentless, demanding that it wasn't just trying to talk anymore. Something shattered within her. "Get ready!" she cried. Adrenaline surging through her veins. Her mind raced. Would they fight? Run? Or was the house itself the true enemy? Another thick silence enveloped the room before she could react. Then came the sound, a crash from downstairs, echoing through the walls like the tolling of a bell, and suddenly, she knew they would have to confront whatever lay ahead. What would they find when they opened that door? And was it truly safe to stay within these walls any longer? Breathless and desperate, she readied herself for the darkness to spill into their sanctuary. The crash resounded like a gunshot, jolting Sarah back to reality. She squeezed the lamp in her trembling hand, as if it could shield her from the encroaching dread. The children, a frozen tableau of fear, huddled beneath the blanket, their wide eyes peering from the folds like tiny sentinels guarding a fortress. "Stay quiet," she whispered again. Instinctively, she moved towards the door, every nerve on fire. The scratching had now switched to a series of rhythmic thumps, as if something was forcefully testing the integrity of the barrier between them. Her mind raced. What was down there? Was it human? Or something worse? She shushed the voice that warned her to run, to take the kids and escape into the night. There was no time. Whatever lurked in the shadows was growing more impatient. The heavy breathing paused, followed by silence that pressed upon her like water in a sinking ship. Then, the voice returned, now laced with impatience. "Let me in, you don't want to be left alone." The words slithered into her ears, cold and sinuous. Each syllable conjured images of the vanished families, their muffled pleas echoing in the air around her. Sarah's heart lurched. She fought the instinct to succumb to its eerie entreaty. "Don't listen," she hissed at herself. "It's trying to lure you." Jake trembled beside her, nudging his sister. "What if it's Dad?" The innocence in his voice cut deeper than a knife. The thought of her husband dragged into this horror clawed at her sanity. But she knew better. Dad would never knock like that, she choked out, clenching her fists. Don't say that. And in that moment, the thumping escalated to a maddening crescendo, it seemed to grow impatient as if aware of her thoughts. A dull thud vibrated through the house, and the walls responded with splintering cracks, like bones breaking underfoot. Their safe corner, a haven she had desperately tried to maintain, felt illusory, dissolving in the darkness that pressed in around them. She could taste the fear, thick and metallic, as it tightened its grip on her throat. With a sudden burst of resolve, Sarah twisted the knob of the bedroom door, her heart pounding in brutal rhythm against her ribs. The door resisted at first, as if whispering its own fears. With a final heave, it cracked open, revealing a sliver of the shadowy hallway. Lily shrieked, squeezing her eyes shut, while Jake clutched his sister's arm, eyes wide and pleading. "Mom, no. Just a peek," she promised, her voice barely above a whisper, but the words felt like broken glass against her tongue. Half illuminated by the feeble light of her phone, the hallway appeared distorted and alive, shadows twisting into grotesque shapes. The air hung heavy, swirling with whispers and an unseen menace. Then, just as she leaned to peer into the darkness, the front door crashed open, sending a bolt of icy dread racing through her spine. The violent rush of wind howled into the house, carrying the scent of damp earth and something more repugnant like decay. "Run!" Sarah shouted, instinct forcing her into action. She lunged back to grab the kids, but the jagged instant of fear left them paralyzed. The traces of a figure flickered at the very edge of her vision, briefly illuminated in the dim hallway, a gaunt silhouette with eyes that burned eerily bright. "Mom! What is happening?" Jake's voice cracked. "Get back!" she shouted, pushing them to safety, but she knew their sanctuary was slipping through her fingers. Then came the voice again, hushed and sinister. "They can't save you." Before she could react, the lights flickered and went out, plunging them into absolute darkness. The only sound that pierced the silence was the pounding harder now from within the very walls of their home. With desperation clawing at her heart, she gazed towards the steps leading down, towards the sound, towards something darker than their worst nightmares. What awaited them below? And would they find safety, or had they stepped directly into the heart of their own terror? The darkness swallowed them, a thick veil that amplified every sound, each whisper of wind, each creak of the house becoming an unwelcome companion in their heart-stopping flight. Sarah felt her breath hitch as she clutched the lamp, its weak beam struggling against the void, casting frantic shadows that danced along the walls like grotesque figures in a macabre performance. "Downstairs, we'll find a way out," she urged, motioning for the kids to follow her lead. The thumping intensified, a drumroll of dread that seemed to punctuate their urgency. With trembling hands, she led them down the narrow hallway, the floorboards moaning under their weight. Mom, Jake's voice was barely a whisper, trembling with fear. "What if it catches us? Just stay close. I won't let it." She forced the words through clenched teeth, hiding the fear bubbling inside her. Panic threatened to creep in, the kind that paralyzed when it should ignite instinct. They reached the top of the stairs. Each step down frayed the edges of her resolve. The shadows shifted, creeping closer, curling like eager fingers poised to snatch them away. The air grew cold, and a rancid odor clawed at her throat. It was the unmistakable scent of decay, something rotten and long forgotten. She pressed on, the children's breaths hot and quick beside her, their little hearts thudding like a war drum beneath their soft chests. Then, the sound that sent a chill racing down her spine sliced through the air, the guttural growl of something hungry, the unmistakable promise of malice. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a living entity prowling the dark. Sarah stopped, listening. The growl morphed into laughter, a mocking echo that filled the space around them as if the very walls reveled in their terror. "Mom, what is that?" Lily whimpered, the weight of her small hand in Sarah's tightening as if she could somehow anchor them against the tide of fear. It's nothing. Just stay quiet." But Sarah's voice quavered, betraying the tempestuous knot of fear engulfing her. As they descended the last step, the light from the lamp flickered violently before they entered the kitchen, revealing the chaos that awaited them. Chairs were overturned, debris scattered like a storm had swept through. Distantly, she could hear the faint echo of a child's laughter, sweet yet twisted, weaving through the wreckage, making the bile rise in her throat. "Mom, look!" Jake pointed, his finger trembling as it directed her gaze to the open doorway leading to the basement. The blackness below loomed larger, beckoning with a promise of answers wrapped in terror. "Don't go there!" Lily cried, terror gripping her voice. "Please!" The laughter twisted, morphing into a wail, a sound so anguished it resonated deep in Sarah's bones. It was the sound of betrayal, of innocence lost. It pressed against her, begging to peel away her resolve. She had to choose, face the growing horror beyond the basement door or confront whatever awaited them in the suffocating dark. "Mom!" Jake sobbed, pulling at her shirt as if by mere touch he could tether her to sanity and keep her from plunging into the abyss. "No!" she snapped, panic lacing her voice. "We have to move. We can't stay here." Sarah turned towards the basement, dread coiling around her heart like a constrictor, squeezing tighter. Each step forward felt like a departure from safety, a push beyond the limits of reality into something far worse than simple fear, and as she stood at the threshold, the floor beneath her trembled. The laughter intensified, echoing into an otherworldly howl, drowning out her thoughts. What could possibly lie hidden in that darkness? Was it waiting for them, silently eager to claim its next victims? She took a deep breath, her heart pounding like a wild beast, and felt the weight of choice pressing on her soul. Then, with the last flicker of light, the basement door creaked open, and something or someone shifted in the shadows below, waiting what awaited them in the depths of darkness. And what would they lose once they stepped inside? The air chilled as Sarah stood at the basement door, the darkness feeling almost alive, swirling and pulsating like an unseen tide. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but the children were depending on her, and there was nowhere else to go. Cautiously, she stepped forward, feeling the sharp breath of fear caressing her neck. "Mom, don't!" Jake tugged on her sleeve, his voice a panicked squeak that shattered the thick silence. Sarah turned to him, desperation reflecting in his wide eyes. "Stay close," she hissed, her voice barely more than a whisper. She felt as though the shadows were watching, hungry and patient. The faint rustle at the bottom of the stairs sent shivers racing through her spine. As she stepped into the basement, the lamp flickered wildly, illuminating a landscape of horror. Muffled sounds echoed off the damp walls, fragmented whispers that twisted her thoughts. The air was thick with the smell of rot, that nauseating dampness clinging to her throat like a warning. The laughter from before now morphed into sinister giggles, a child's mirth coated in malice. "Where are you?" she called out, trying to sound braver than she felt. No answer. Just the soft patter of something moving in the shadows. Suddenly, the lamp flickered out, plunging them into an oppressive darkness. Panic surged within her, and she instinctively reached for the children, grasping their hands tightly. "Stay calm," she whispered, though her own heart raced against her ribcage like a caged animal. A soft rustle broke the stillness, followed by the sound of tiny footsteps. They were too precise, too intentional. It sent a jolt of ice through her veins. Without light, shadows lost their form, and what once seemed like harmless darkness now twisted with foreboding shapes. "Jake? Lily?" she murmured, hoping against hope that they could still hear her. The children clung to her sides, breathing heavily, filling the silence with their terrified gasps. The footsteps grew closer, a rhythmic tapping, like nails against wood. Then came a voice soft and high-pitched, echoing in the dank air. "Mommy, why did you leave me?" Sarah's blood turned to ice. It was the voice of her daughter, yet twisted and haunted. "Lily?" Sarah's heart seized, dread washing over her. If this was a trick, it was aimed at her core, and it hurt more than she could bear. "Mommy!" The voice wailed, deeply sorrowful. She felt an ache in her chest, torn between the instinct to protect and the fear of looking back into the shadows. "Stay behind me. We need to move," she ordered, stepping forward despite the sickening feeling that pulsated from the darkness. They had to find a way out. But as they shuffled deeper into the basement, the shadows thickened, wrapping them in an oppressive blanket. Then, the laughter erupted again, but this time it felt closer, more sinister. There was no way it came from the children. A figure darted across the edge of the beam, pale and fleeting. Sarah froze. "Run! Now!" she shouted, her command bursting from her lips like a flare in the night. But would they be able to escape whatever lurked within the darkness? As they turned to flee, a cold grip tightened around Sarah's ankle, yanking her down. She crashed onto the damp floor, and in that instant, dread enveloped her. Gaze locked on the shadow approaching, she could barely breathe as it loomed closer. The children screamed in unison, horrified, desperate. "Mom!" Jake's voice cracked, fear tightening his words. What had she done? A chilling whisper slithered through the air, scratching against her mind. "You shouldn't have come down here." Sarah's heart raced. She could feel the weight of condensation on her skin, an ominous presence eager for something more than just a scare. Could she and her children survive this darkness? As the figure ascended from the shadows, she understood, they had awakened something far worse than their nightmares. And it was hungry. What would she sacrifice to protect her children from the truth lurking below? And could they escape before it claimed them all? The air grew heavier, swirling thick with dread as Sarah struggled against the unseen grip on her ankle. She could feel the clammy touch seep through her jeans, icy fingers digging into her skin. The children's cries echoed around her, warped by the oppressive shadows, distorting every word into something unrecognizable. "Jake! Lily! Hold on!" She fought to pry herself free, each movement sending jolts of agony through her body, but the darkness was relentless, pulling her deeper into its embrace. "Mommy!" Lily's voice was a melody laced with terror, rising above the chaos. "Help us!" The laughter surged again, mocking and cruel, playing like a twisted lullaby that ricocheted off the damp walls of the basement. The sound enveloped Sarah, tightening around her throat. She didn't have time to think, instinct drove her, and she yanked her leg with all her strength. With a final desperate pull, she broke free, skin tearing as she lunged forward, scrambling toward her children. The flickering light returned momentarily, illuminating the basement in a ghostly glow. Shadows danced grotesquely, their forms morphing into things that should not exist. "Get up! We need to go!" she shouted, grabbing both children by the arms. They huddled close, faces pale and wide-eyed, their breaths coming out in short gasps. "Where do we go?" Jake's voice quavered, panic spilling over. The laughter turned into a shriek, rising in pitch, slicing through the thick air. It felt as though the very walls were closing in, suffocating them with the weight of whatever lurked just beyond the light's reach. "There!" Sarah pointed to a low window at the far end of the room, shadows pooling nearby like a predator waiting to strike. "If we can just get to that, we might." But the words faltered on her lips as something darted out of the darkness, barreling toward them faster than her eyes could follow. It had no form, just a swirl of shadows and a single, glaring eye that bore through the darkness. The moment it reached them, every flicker of warmth vanished. "Run!" she screamed again, heart pounding, pulling the children toward the window. They stumbled after her, the terror in their eyes pushing them to move faster. As they dodged towards the light, the air grew thick with despair, a haunting whisper chilling her bones. "You can't escape, not from me." They reached the window at the same time. Sarah heaved against it, but it wouldn't budge. It felt sealed under some unnatural force. Panic clawed at her throat as she glanced over her shoulder, the figure looming larger, chaotic shadows swirling around it, almost forming a grotesque, human-like shape. "Mom! It's coming!" Jake cried, clutching his sister. "Help me!" Sarah rasped, slamming a fist against the glass, desperation flooding her veins. It splintered under her blows but held firm. She could hear it behind her, feel its hot breath like a pulse against her back. "Mommy!" Lily whimpered, pressing herself against her brother. The dread sank deeper, the sound of their hearts pounding almost drowning out the evil's laughter closing in. Then, with a desperate push, she kicked at the window with every bit of strength, and it shattered, sending glass and shards of hope spiraling out. "No! Get back!" The figure lunged, a darkness full of rage, but in that moment of panic, the children screamed and pushed through the opening. Sarah followed, tumbling into the grass outside, breathless and shivering as the cool night air bit at her skin. They hit the ground hard but scrambled to their feet. The backyard stretched before them, a familiar yet ominous expanse. "Go to the house," she commanded, but as they stumbled away from the basement, a menacing laugh echoed behind them, rippling through the night air. "We're not safe." Sarah turned to look, feeling the heat of the shadow close, longing to turn back. What had they awakened? As they dashed toward the porch, she only felt the growing sense of dread. The trees seemed to close in, and the air thickened with the weight of their impending doom. What if the darkness followed them? Was the world outside just as tainted as the basement? As they reached the door, Sarah felt something snag her ankle again, deeper than before. "Mom! Don't let it take you!" Jake yelled, pulling on her with all his might. "Hold on!" she gasped. The shadows coiled around her, pulling her back, whispering terrible truths into her mind. What would she sacrifice to ensure her children didn't share her fate? Would she lose herself in the darkness? The last remnants of light flickered as they desperately yanked, but the grip tightened, and the laughter morphed into a sinister chorus. Where would they hide if she couldn't let go? Had they really escaped, or had they merely begun to awaken the true horror that lay in wait? In a frenzy, Sarah pulled with every ounce of strength, feeling the icy grip reluctantly loosen as Jake and Lily yanked at her arms. The shadows that had once enveloped her like a thick fog began to fade, but the gaping maw of darkness still lurked just behind them, its sinister laugh sputtering like a flame that refused to die. "Go! Get inside now!" she rasped, her breath coming in sharp gasps as they stumbled onto the porch. The door loomed heavy and threatening, almost as if it too was imbued with the malevolence that had clawed at them moments ago. They burst through the threshold, slamming the door shut behind them. She leaned against it, her heart pounding like war drums, breathless, consuming the stale air of their once safe home. Did we lose it?" Jake stammered, his wide eyes darting around the small hallway, seeking reassurance in the familiar frames and shadows. "I think so," Sarah whispered, though doubt gnawed at her. The heavy thump of her heartbeat drowned out the silence, a terrible reminder that they were still far from safe. Mommy Lily's voice was tiny, fragile. "What was that thing?" "I don't know, honey. But we need to stick together." The words felt weak, especially when she could still hear that laugh echoing through her mind, a nightmarish refrain promising that it wouldn't rest until it had them all. They remained frozen in place, shadows creeping along the edges, pooling and swelling like ghosts in the dim light. The living room stretched before them, cluttered with memories but haunted by new fears. She could almost see them, the remnant darkness, slithering closer with malicious intent. "Let us go to the kitchen, it's safer," she suggested, even as dread twisted in her stomach. The kitchen had a window, their best means of escape if it came down to it. With a heavy hand, she led her children down the hall, every step a reminder of the terror that had chased them. The chill of the air shifted as they passed the photographs of happier days, now twisted by the dim light, a laugh frozen in time, smiles edged with shadows. When they reached the kitchen, Sarah pulled the curtains aside, hoping to spot refuge just beyond the yard. The moonlight bathed everything in silver, but what lay beyond danced with danger. She could see figures, dark shadows flickering just outside the edge of the property, quick, darting movements that hinted at something waiting just out of sight. "Look at that," Jake said, voice trembling. They're watching us." "What?" Panic surged again as she spun around. Sure enough, from within the depths of the blackness outside, strange glimmers peered back at them. The shadows weren't just an illusion, they were alive. There was a thud against the door behind them, rattling the frame. The sound felt like the hammer of a judge's gavel, signing a sentence they could never escape. "Mom!" Lily cried, her small hands pressed against the kitchen table, trying to muster courage that was wavering. "Stay close!" Sarah shouted, throwing her body against the door as another thump sent tremors through the frame. Each impact sent a thrill of terror into her bones, churning her stomach like a storm. "What do we do?" Jake's voice cracked, revealing the very panic Sarah fought to suppress. "There has to be a way out, a way to fight it," she whispered, searching the kitchen for anything useful, a knife, a candle, anything that could fend off the darkness. The room felt smaller, closing in around them as shadows deepened. But in that search, a distant whisper tugged at her thoughts, a soft taunting that echoed the laughter from the basement. "You can't fight what you don't understand," it hissed, slipping through the cracks of her resolve like a serpent. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging them into darkness. The moment of calm came before the surge of panic. The shadows inside crept closer, and for a brief moment, she thought she could see them taking shape, faces forming in the haze. "Mommy!" The urgency in Jake's voice pierced through her thoughts. She clawed at her own racing heart, gripping tight to her children. Then she heard it, the whispers growing louder, shaping into something more explicit, seductive even. "You can save them, Sarah, if you let me in." What was this darkness trying to pull her into? What could it offer to make her betray her children? She felt a shiver run down her spine as the air grew thick with temptation, a blaring siren calling her towards an unseen horror. What if she had the power to change their fate, but at a cost far greater than she could bear? "Don't listen!" she screamed, but the whispers wrapped around her confusion, weaving themselves into her mind. As the shadows clawed at the walls, she sensed their presence tangling tighter, the promise of power and terror intertwining in a wretched dance. "Mommy!" Jake's voice quivered, pulling Sarah back to reality. "Hold on tight!" she yelled, readying herself for what would come next. But as she braced for the force of the door slamming open, she couldn't shake the question that trailed behind like a dark shadow: what if the only way to save her children was to embrace the darkness herself? In the quiet chaos that wrapped around Sarah and her children, fear pulsated like a second heartbeat. She clung tighter to Jake and Lily as the darkness outside surged, pressing at their seams like a beast lying in wait. The kitchen, once a bastion of warmth filled with laughter, felt foreign now, a looming prison where shadows whispered terrible promises. Her fingers trembled against the cool surface of the countertop, desperate for any semblance of a weapon. She had found a knife, its blade shimmering momentarily under the weak kitchen lights. But how could a mere object defend them against the terror that lay outside? Then came the door splintering wood and a feral howl shaking the foundation of their home. It exploded open, crashing against the wall with an ominous clang. The air thickened with the rancid smell of rank decay, and the shadows poured in, swirling like a tempest. They danced around her, each form laced with a malevolent intent, eyes glinting hungrily, unblinking and ravenous. "Run!" Sarah screamed, her voice raw with urgency. They darted past the chaos, out of the kitchen and into the living room, her heart racing like a wild drumbeat. But the shadowy figures began to take form, twisted silhouettes of lost souls grasping her children with ghostly fingers, reaching for their innocence. "Mom!" Jake pulled away, their connection fraying under the weight of terror. But just as Sarah lunged to hold him, wave after wave of darkness crashed against her, and she fell to the floor. The room twisted, shadows coiling around her legs, urging her deeper into their embrace. Just as dread threatened to consume her, an idea flickered, a desperate plan born from the very horror she faced. "Lily! Jake! Listen to me!" she shouted, desperate to break through the paralysis of fear. "We have to stand together. Close your eyes. Hold my hands. Focus on each other." Their faces, lost and terrified yet so familiar, encouraged her resolve. She reached for them, each hand slipping into place. United in that moment, she felt a spark of strength rising within her, a warmth that fought against the brisk chill of the shadows encroaching. This is our home," she declared, voice rising above the cacophony. "You're not welcome here." As she said it, confidence mingled with the vast terror swallowing her, igniting a flicker of defiance. The shadows recoiled, hissing and leaping back as if scalded. She propelled raw power into her words, creating a shield woven from love and warmth, refusing to let fear dictate their fate. "We will not fall. We are stronger than you." Behind closed eyes, Lily and Jake began to chant softly, repeating their mother's defiance as if each word was an incantation. Their voices melded together, ripping through the thick atmosphere, turning the tide of dread into resistance. Like a gust of wind snuffing smoke, the darkness shrieked in rage. Furies coiled and lashed out with every ounce of malice, twisting in a vain attempt to claim the family. But Sarah felt it, the warm glow of their shared bond pushing against the oppressive weight, illuminating the room like dawn breaking through a long, sleepless night. As the shadows lunged forward, Sarah and her children surged upward, and she sensed something shift. With the last embers of fear burning away, a powerful light erupted from within them, illuminating the kitchen, the walls, and the expanding shadows, scorching the very foundation of that malevolent presence. In stark contrast to their initial horror, the air transformed, fragrant with the scent of lavender, comforting, protective, and alive. Shadows flickered as if being blown away by a gust of wind, the laughter distorting into haunting wails. The darkness writhed violently but then began to retreat, inching back and forth like it had met an immovable force. "You can't escape," it howled, but with each step it took away from them, Sarah felt strength suffusing every corner of her being. "Mom!" Jake shouted, his eyes wide with possibility. "It's working." Their combined strength expelled the darkness, and Sarah grasped tightly together. Feeling the warmth of family enveloping her, a shield against the cruel night. One final push propelled the shadows beyond the doorway, across the threshold, until they shattered like glass against the midnight sky, allowing the last threads of twilight to reclaim the dark. "What just happened?" Lily asked, confusion lighting her face as the chaos subsided and tranquility returned. "We fought it," Sarah whispered, her heart swelling with pride. Together. They stood in silence, wrapped in the warmth of their bond, the echoes of terror still lingering like a distant thunderstorm. The outside world had returned, crickets sang again, and the night sky unfolded to twinkling stars, a stark contrast to what had just transpired. The door held against the darkness, firmly closed, yet Sarah knew that shadows never truly disappeared. They might lurk, waiting to pounce at any moment. But now, they faced their home fortified not just by walls, but by love, resilience, and the strength they forged in the heart of terror. "I think we should get some hot chocolate," Sarah suggested, voice soft and tired. "Good idea," Jake replied, a small smile breaking across his face. As they moved together, step by step, that terrifying night now became a legend of love forged in the dark, a reminder that even in the face of something frightful, family and courage could always light the way forward. And in the distance, all around them, the lingering dread began to fade, replaced by the whispers of a new dawn. The battle may have ended, but their stories would continue, a resolution entwined with hope, threaded through every moment, vivid against the backdrop of darkness. This is where they would reclaim their lives, 1 minute at a time, finding solace in knowing they had survived together. So now, I need you to act. You need to subscribe immediately to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive stories that will keep you at the edge of your seat. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm and let us grow together. Flood the comment section below with your reactions and theories about this ending. Your voice matters, and don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Spread the word and be part of our community of true fans who understand the importance of support.